Hello and welcome to Your Family Bank podcast. It's great to be with you again, and got Jake Stahl on the podcast today as our guest. And he works in the field of psychology, specifically related to sales. And so we're gonna have a lot of fun with this one today. Jake, thanks for being on the show.
Oh, Blake, thanks for having me. This is quite an honor.
Yeah, I'm excited for it. Why don't you give a 2 minute background for our listeners
Sure.
about kind of what you do and your background?
Yeah, so I've been a sales trainer for about 30 years. But the thing that kind of makes me different is I look at it from the behavioral side, not from the sales side. So I have a degree in psychology, strong background in social psychology, master's certification in neurolinguistic programming, which Tony Robbins has made famous. And everything that I develop, Blake, has to do with how does the average psychology of the human being make it easier for us to communicate with them? Uh, they can feel free to send hate mail to me for this, but we always talk about how our kids are different and unique. And the reality is, we're not. We all think largely the same. We all react largely the same. And understanding that can significantly increase your ability to communicate with other people.
Yeah, and that's why I think you're the right guest for the show, because how we communicate with spouse and kids, especially around money, is definitely has a huge impact. But before we dive in with that, I always like to pause and ask our guests, what is something unique about you, something different that most people maybe don't know, just kind of for fun for people to get to know you better.
I am a licensed blackjack dealer. How's that?
Okay.
I love I love the whole art of trying to win something that inherently is impossible to win all the time, but it's a great game. And when I was going through a rough time in my life, I wanted to do something completely different. And the blackjack course was 200 hours, believe it or not. And it was great. I can now play blackjack better than anybody I know, and I probably still lose equally as well.
Well, if you're the dealer, then the dealer wins. Like, so then it's a good thing.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, it was great. I enjoy it. I never put it to professional use. I just have the certification, but it makes it a lot easier to play the game when you're at the casino.
Okay. Well, let's start with kind of your own association around finances and how you learned about it. So, like, was there a specific instance in your life growing up, either how your parents taught you or just something you observed that kind of shaped, had a big impact on you for how you thought about or your relationship with money and finances, for good or for bad?
Yeah, absolutely. My dad was a solo business owner. He owned a retail pharmacy, which was difficult to do among the midst of chain pharmacies. And yet his pharmacy was the one everybody went to. And the pharmacy thrived and did amazingly well. So I learned a lot about money from them. But there's one pharmacy, Blake, that was the real stunner for me was my dad retired wealthy. And he always tells a story that when he and my mom got married, they had $7 between the two of them. And he talked about the hard work and how many hours a week he used to put in. But that always affected me. You know, they started with $7 and he retired very well to do. And I remember over the years the struggles he went through, owning the business and trying to make it work and failing in some ventures. But he always led by example, which was an amazing way to grow up.
Yeah, it's always interesting to hear people's stories about this. Was money something that was formally talked about, or was more of just you observed it because of the situation they were in?
It was more that it was observed. I can't say we ever had a sit down money talk, but he never shied away from having me go to the bank with him when he got a loan. He never boxed me out of any conversations with investors because he was a big investor. He always let me sit there and just watch, but it was more lead by example, not lead by my teachings.
Yeah, I think that's a really cool thing when we let our kids be part of the conversation. You observe and get a lot through almost osmosis. Being there in the
Yeah.
room, hearing those conversations. Our kids pick up so much more than we think they do. A lot of times we think, oh, this is going to be boring for them. They're not going to want to come. But as you said, how much did you learn from being in the room with those and seeing that example, seeing the negotiation, seeing, what it's like to go get a loan and how much the bank, opens you up and exposes everything and all those things.
I'll tell you kind of a funny story. I remember going to the bank with my dad when I was a kid, and that was a long time ago that I was a kid. And I remember sitting there, and my dad needed a car loan for his business. And they sat there, and the banker was a VP of the bank, and he's like, Pete, how much do you need? And my dad told him, he goes, great, you got it. And they shook hands, and we all walked out of the room. And I'm like, what just happened here? No paperwork, no nothing. It was just no credit check, just Pete, you got it. And now, I went to buy a car a couple of months ago, and it's like buying a house, 32 pages and credit checks. So it's come a long way, needless to say.
Yeah, it's come a long way, but I also think, maybe there's something to be said there of like local bankers using, the same people who know you already know that information.
Yeah.
I found that out recently with building an office building, and then, going next to like, hey, well, I need a line of credit for my firm. And like, okay, yeah, we already have all your information. We just need these two things. Like, oh, well, that makes such a big difference.
Right. Yeah.
To have that relationship side of things.
Yeah.
All right, so let's talk about, using your specific background. What are some key things that people could use to help communicate better with their kids, specifically about teaching them their values and getting them on the right track so that their kids don't end up, being overly entitled, spoiled, that kind of stuff?
Well, I have 4 kids that are all over the age of 28. So I like to think we did well. They're all pretty well adjusted. But I would say the big thing that we always did with our kids was we noticed every little gesture or movement during a conversation. So, in other words, I know a lot of business people and parents that they will bully through things with their kids. So a kid will hang their head and they'll just give one word answers, and the parents will try and force it through that look at me and listen to me when I'm talking to you. And the reality is, if you convert it around and say, I noticed you dropped your head. What did I say that made that happen? Or I noticed you gave a heavy sigh. What happened in your head just then? And what winds up happening is when you acknowledge those things, it's amazing what you'll hear back from the kids. We were always very honest with our kids like that. Hey, I noticed you just walked away, and that's not the right thing to do. So tell me what I did that sparked that. And sometimes the answers, Blake, just surprise you. It's not what you think it is. And it's led to a relationship with the kids that they tell us everything, almost to an uncomfortable level. They tell us everything.
Yeah, something my wife and I have done, and this is more related to, I have younger kids. Mine are 13 and are in 10 right now. But when they were young, my wife wanted to make it so there was a space where they could communicate. So every night it was, they're laying in bed. Okay, how was your day? And it was specific questions. Did anyone look at or touch your privates? Those kind of things. So there was a safe space so that if anything, did you see any bad pictures? So it became a common theme for them, so that if that did happen, and then the key was if that did happen, they told you, you don't react. They feel safe telling you those things.
Good point.
As little or as big as they are. And then that's opened up. So now, yeah, like you said, they tell us everything. Sometimes like, I don't want to know.
Right.
I don't want every thought.
Yeah.
And especially I don't want to know it at 11 o'clock at night when I'm trying to go to sleep.
Yeah. Yeah, we've had some conversations where, like, I have 3 daughters and a son, and one of my daughters will tell me something. It's like, oh, geez, you didn't have to go that far into detail. But, that's kind of the double-edged part of the sword. The other thing we did, Blake, was we conditioned the kids. So when we'd sit down at dinner at night, tell us something positive that happened today. So that's kind of the way they think and the way they focus. And as you're finding out now with teenagers, it's not always a positive story. But when you condition kids to think like that, it's amazing how they take that to later in life. And all of our kids now are very positive thinkers. Even in the heat of battle, they tend to bring out the positive.
Well, so you used an interesting word there with conditioning, and I think most people have a negative connotation around that. But
Yeah.
I agree with you. That's a great way to do it. I think there's two key things you did there. Not only did you tell them, had them think positively, but you had family dinner regularly enough with them that made an impact. And I think those two things together are really big. There's a lot of research around family dinners and what that does for the family as well. But maybe speak a little bit more to conditioning and what that is, maybe more as on the scientific level and how that can be impactful and how people can use that tool.
Yeah, I hear that a lot that, oh, well, conditioning is bad or there's a negative connotation. But the reality is, we're all conditioned to thousands of things. Touch a hot stove, pull your hand away. That's conditioning. Heat, pull away. See a bear, run the opposite direction. Pick up a knife, know it's sharp. We're all conditioned in a million different things. So why not take that inherent need the brain has to simplify and get conditioned and use it for the positive? The one example I always hear from people is, well, that's like Pavlov's dogs. And so they associate it with saliva and dogs. But the brilliance of that wasn't that it was dogs and dinner time and bells. It was that if you did something repeatedly and gave back a certain stimulus, that action allowed that person to easily give back the stimulus. It's the brain's need to create rhythm and conditioning and just shortcuts to different things. So if we can associate dinner time with positive vibes, or to your point, if you can associate stories about maybe something touching your kids with a safety net, they know that whenever they bring up a story, they're conditioned to think there will be a safety net there. So conditioning can be a double-edged sword, but I, personally speaking, being in sales as long as I have, I don't think we use conditioning often enough. We can do it to ourselves. Our internal monologue is all about conditioning. You hear people all the time, oh, I feel like I'm an imposter. Well, you've conditioned yourself to feel that way. So what's the stimulus that made that happen, and how can you change it? But too often we get caught up in the what we've been conditioned to do and not how we got there. And often it's as simple as changing how we got here.
So yeah, let's dive into that more because I think a lot of people have bad associations with money because of their parents fought about it. It was a
Yep.
moment of contention with mom and dad because if you asked for anything, it was always no, don't, how dare you ask for it, whatever. How can someone break that conditioning so that they have a better relationship with money and then can further help their kids have that relationship?
There's one thing I do with my clients who are suffering from a bad conditioning cycle is asking them right away when they feel that emotion coming on, ask yourself, how old are you right now? Because usually that conditioning was brought in earlier in life. Well, I was 13 and my dad gave me my allowance and I blew it and I was afraid to tell him I blew it. So I don't talk about money that easily. All right, then let's talk about that 13-year-old. How can we go back and say that 13-year-old, you're okay. What you did was fine, but it doesn't have to dictate what happens in the future. I know for sure some of your listeners are going to go, that's dumb, that's too easy. It actually is that easy. You need to pinpoint when that conditioning occurred and then take steps to get rid of it. But the first step, Blake, is just recognition. What made me feel this way right now? And how old was I when that conditioning took place?
Mm. Yeah, that's fascinating. It's always interesting to me how so many things are simple, but
Yeah.
we don't want to do them because they're simple. you,
Well,
you may, people can know that that's the answer, but how many of them are still going to do it after listening to this? Probably not very many.
and one of the dangers, Blake, of conditioning is good or bad, we get used to it. So there's a certain comfort in that taking place. So if somebody's overspending and they're getting a huge credit card bill and they pay it down, chances are there was a certain comfort in having that large credit card bill, so they're going to do it again. And as weird as it sounds to have comfort in misery like that, that's really what it is. There's an expectation. I know what to expect. I'm going to be miserable. I feel comfortable in that. And this happens across all areas of our life, not just money.
Yeah, we take the misery that's predictable versus the happiness that's
Exactly.
unpredictable.
Yeah, exactly right. Well, and there's the fear that you're not going to get that happiness. So you take solace in the misery. And again, it is this easy. If people were to do this every day and just take note of when their feelings start to change and why, and pinpoint it, it takes 8 or 10 repetitions of breaking that conditioning before it's broken.
Awesome. Yeah, 8 to 10 is not bad. That's less than I would have thought. So let's talk about how can people, let's say their kids are already older. They missed their window with conditioning them then, early. There's, how do they start having conversations with their older kids maybe to break those conditioning habits that they unintentionally put on their kids?
See, it's funny because I found with my older kids, the conditioning conversations come a little bit easier because they can start to rationalize and see it. When the kids are young, we control their conditioning. When the kids are older, typically they control their own. Give you an example. I have one daughter who is a chronic entrepreneur. So she'll come up with a brilliant idea, and I mean brilliant. Some of her ideas are just incredible. And she'll start it, and then halfway through, she'll stop. And she'll come up with another idea, and then she'll start that one and go that direction. And it gets to the point where it's like, you got to make up your mind. You got to settle somewhere. But a lot of times it's that conversation of what made you stop halfway and then start something new. And to me, Blake, it's about making it their idea. So what would make you continue with this new idea that you have? And what is the fear of failure? And a lot of times, if you get people that it's their own idea, in psychology, they call it the IKEA effect. If you get them involved in building their own ideas, they're more likely to accept it. That's what I wind up doing with my kids. How can I get them to actively build this idea that this conditioning is incorrect? And it's not an overnight thing. This is a bunch of conversations that all take place. But in my firm opinion, it's easier to decondition an older child than it is a younger one.
Hmm. Yeah, you can probably rationalize with them a little bit more, help them. They
Yeah.
can understand the topics, that kind of thing. I am loving this because this is like backing up a lot of the stuff that I've been talking about on the show and within my course that I'm building out about how you have to let the kids be the ones to come up with ideas. From my side, it's from the starting a business or having a value creation activity so they can generate money. But you got to let them generate the idea, come to you with a proposal, and do that because they're going to be a lot more excited about it. They're going to have the follow through. They're going to make sure it happens.
Yeah.
So it's good to know I'm on the right track. This is good validity for what we're building and what we're trying to do here. So that's awesome. Let's talk about legacy within for you. What does legacy mean to you? How are you trying to pass that on to your kids and grandkids if you have any or future grandkids?
I do have one granddaughter. Thank you. I think legacy for me is just promoting the idea that you can always get better no matter what happens in your life. I think my legacy is going to be resilience. That being said, I'm building a company called Orchestrate that recently got a magnificent market valuation. So I'm looking for investors. So that I hope will be part of their legacy as well. Um, but for me, I come from a family where there's a lot of depression and we've had suicides throughout our family tree. And to me, the legacy I want to leave the kids is that of resilience and strength and overcoming any hurdle to get to where they need to be. As much as I want to leave them financially sound, I would feel much better if they learned how to do it themselves so they didn't have to rely on others for that. So that's part of it as well. We always give the kids money for their Christmas and anniversaries. And for my granddaughter, we always put money in her college account. So we're always trying to reinforce financial readiness as well as financial independence.
Yeah, while this podcast and a lot of what we talk about is stuff around money, it's never the first thing people bring up with legacy ever, because it really doesn't matter. Because if you've taught them, right, like you said, that they are financially independent and they're resilient enough that they can figure it out on their own, who cares what they get from you? That's just going to expand and give them more opportunities to do great things. But at the end of the day, it's what is the value that I'm passing on, because that is far more impactful than anything else I can give them financially. That's
Yeah.
why we have the lottery winner effect with people who win lotteries.
Right.
99% of them are back to poverty
They're
level within
broke.
5 years or less,
Yep.
because they don't know how to handle the money. They don't have the values around that. So you have to teach the values before the finances come. Now, if the finances come because of inheritance or whatever, great, totally fine. But it's only going to be a tool that expands what you've already instilled in them and their values.
And Blake, I would even argue that sometimes you don't know what to ask. You think money is going to solve everything. So when you have it, you use it to rapidly solve issues of not a big house and not 12 vacations and not 6 cars. And that's not really the issue. As a matter of fact, if you look at research, they will say that multimillionaires are the largest class of antidepressant takers on the planet. It's not even the poor. It's the rich that are the most depressed. So money's not a solver. It's a tool to help better you, but only if you're educated on how to do it,
Yeah,
in my
you
opinion.
have to have the knowledge.
Yeah.
That is, and that's what we're trying to do, is empower people to have that knowledge on what to do. Well, I mean, we've already covered so many things that I think are super super high impact. The last question I want to leave with, and I ask this of everybody: best advice that you ever got. Doesn't have to be financially related, doesn't even have to be business related, but best advice that you got that really had an impact on you.
Don't compete with other people, compete with you from yesterday. So
Okay.
we look at so many people and we say, "Oh, I wish as rich as they are. I wish I had a job like they do. I wish I had this and that and the other." And we're never going to stack up to other people, because as soon as we do, we're going to find a new other people to stack up against. And so you have a goal that is unclear and nebulous and ever changing. And that leads to a lot of unhappiness. But if I can go to bed today and think, I did like 0.75% better than I did the day before, and tomorrow I'm pretty sure I can do 1% better than I did today. That to me is the self fulfilling. That to me is where true satisfaction comes from. And for years, Blake, I wasn't like that. For years, it was like, look what the neighbors have, look what my parents have, look what they have. And it led to a never ending trail of disappointment, because you never, ever get there. But if I can just be better than me from yesterday, and at the end of this year, I can be even 10% better than I was last year, I'm on an upward trajectory, man. I can't go anywhere but up.
Yeah, and doing a 3/4 or 0.5% better isn't that much, just that little bit, but the compound effect is astronomical.
Yeah.
And then, Dan Sullivan, he's strategic coach. He always says you have to measure backwards. You don't measure forward to your ideal. You don't measure against anyone else. You measure backwards to who you were yesterday, who you were last year. And then when you do that, you realize, holy cow, look how far I've come.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I think we can actually take steps backwards at times. And we just need to understand that that's part of being human. That every day isn't going to be an increase. Some days it's going to be a setback, and maybe even some weeks. But that gives you even more to grow from. So,
Yeah.
best
And that's
advice
your
I ever
correct
got was
measuring stick
compare me to
then.
me. Yep.
If you measure backwards, oh, I didn't get better. Okay, that's my wake up sign. I am not on the right trail. And it's an appropriate, wake up sign, as opposed to, oh, I'm not up to that person. I'm not here where I wanted to be, all those things.
Yeah, and I would say, Blake, honestly, at the times I fell backwards in life, and there were quite a few of them, The times I felt backwards, it's just because I lost focus on just being better than me. It's because I grabbed for a ring I wasn't ready for, or I tried to live up to somebody that I just wasn't going to live up to, and that made me fall back. So as long as I'm cognizant of that and I can break that conditioning, um, I can see nowhere to go but up.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jake. A lot of really great stuff today. Appreciate your expertise and taking the time today.
Thanks for having me, Blake. It was great.